Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Off the Cushion podcast. I'm Sam Provazane, and I'm here with Dwayne Rester. How's it going, Dwayne?
It's going fantastic. It's lovely. 5 episodes already. That's wonderful.
It's pretty incredible. I'm super grateful that we keep going. And today's topic is one that may be an entry point for a lot of people when they come to Buddhism for the first time. We're going to try to put a different, more off the cushion spin on it. It's the Four Noble Truths. And so I'm going to read from a pretty tried and true source, the discourse from what are we reading from? The Dhammacakka Pavatana Sutra or Sutta. This is translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi, and I don't know if you can see this. It's in the Buddha's Words, an anthology of discourses from the Pali Canon. This is the setting the wheel of Dhamma or Dharma in motion. Um, so I'll link this in the description for this podcast so that you can pick it up if you like. And I'm just going to read a very small passage about the Four Noble Truths as written in the Pali Canon. Now, this, monks, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, union with what is displeasing is suffering, separation from what is pleasing is suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging or suffering. Now, a lot of technical terms here that we won't discuss in detail because you can find that elsewhere, but we'll give a short summary and then discuss. Now, this, monks, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is this craving that leads to renewed existence accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for extermination. Now, this, monks, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless fading away and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-attachment. Now, this, monks, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is this noble eightfold path that is, and earlier the Buddha describes the noble eightfold path as right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Um, so he describes the Buddha in one of his very first discourses. He describes these four noble truths, or the truths as told to the noble ones, and they can be summarized pretty simply. The first one being that existence is characterized by what he calls suffering, also sometimes translated as dissatisfaction or discontent. And we'll have to discuss in a little bit more detail what that means because it means different things to different people. The second noble truth is that there is an origin of that suffering, and it's because of craving or attachment to the way that we think things are, or attachment to the things that we like, or attachment to the idea that we don't like certain things and we don't want to be near them. That the third noble truth is the possibility of ceasing, of cessation of this type of suffering by relinquishing our hold or our grasp on things, um, and believing that they are a certain way or they will always be a certain way. And the fourth noble truth is that the way to cultivate this cessation is to follow the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, the Noble Eightfold Path is, there's 8 things that we want to think about and cultivate in our lifestyles, and that's a whole different episode. So we're just going to segment that off for a separate time. But perhaps we can start with your thoughts, Dwayne, on the Four Noble Truths. And in particular, we're going to focus on a the Chan approach to practicing these in daily life.
Okay. One of the ways that a teaching that is often used, or at least say a check-in, is what's called the three Dharma seals. We previously talked about that a little bit, but I want to speak about how that kind of works within the Four Noble Truths. Depending on how you look at the Dharma seals, suffering is either in the middle or at the beginning. But anyway, there's suffering, and then there's what's called impermanence, and then there's what's called emptiness or not self. But let's talk about suffering first. It's interesting that in several translations they talk about suffering because it's based on craving, wanting things to be a particular way. But there's also aversion, and what's called the three poisons: greed, hatred, and ignorance. Greed, wanting things to be a particular way. You could say hatred. I like better the term aversion. You want things to be this way. You don't want them to be that way.
Right, right.
And the ignorance or the delusion, which is a better term, greed, aversion, delusion. The delusion is that guess who's setting up this border or this expectation of wanting more, and guess who's saying I don't want this? The I. That's the root source when we talk about not self. But so within suffering, one of my other favorite teachers, it's outside of all religious bounds, J.D. Krishnamurti, he would say that suffering is, I lost my train of thought.
Physical suffering versus mental
Oh,
suffering.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's
Mhm.
physical suffering, which, you have an injury, and that hurts. I'm suffering from my physical suffering. But in most contexts, we're talking about psychological suffering. In
Mhm.
other words, our mentality, our contextualization of wanting things to be one way or not wanting them to be the other. So
Right.
please don't misunderstand when we're talking about suffering. Well, if my house is on fire and I've got to get out, I'm suffering. Yes, we're not talking about that. We're talking about psychological suffering. In other words, stuff that we do through our own mentation, our own conceptualization, our own desires. Obviously, you've got to take care of yourself, your health and fitness. And we could even talk about that type of physical suffering in another realm, because there are ways of managing how you respond to physical injury or stress, or just your leg hurts. There's ways of even addressing that is also psychological. A broken leg is a broken leg, but people respond to these things in different ways. But today we're talking about psychological suffering. So I wanted to just throw that out. And I'm going to go back to you, Sam, so we can go a little bit back and forth and see if you
Great.
wanted to add to that.
No, that's a good one because, and even for Buddhists, for people who are not Buddhists or coming to this for the first time, they might think that this is actually a very negative reaction to
Hmm.
the world. That, oh, all life is suffering. Like that sounds pretty down and out, right? Like what? Why would I even want to consider being Buddhist if I'm hearing that all life is suffering? And I think that's a misunderstanding of what the Buddha is saying and what the tenets of Buddhism are in terms of the Four Noble Truths. It's a very clinical description of existence from the standpoint that we are in one of three different modes at any given time. We want something, we don't want something, or we're neutral to something. So like a super easy example is like I like PlayStation, I don't like Xbox, or I don't care because I don't play video games, you know. And so um I might think that when I get the PlayStation, because I like PlayStation, that brings me happiness. But if I'm looking forward to a PlayStation for, Christmas or some other holiday, and someone gives me an Xbox, that makes me unhappy. Or someone gives me either one of them and I don't care, so it's like it's not a big deal, you know. Actually, if I look deeper into the PlayStation, I start noticing that it's the only thing I've ever wanted, and I'm just so excited that somebody got it for me for Christmas. But then like the next day, it's like it doesn't have that same sheen to it. I'm not so excited about the PlayStation anymore. I'm kind of bummed out that someone got me a red t-shirt as well, like as a stocking stuffer, but I really wanted a green t-shirt. And then I played the PlayStation and I was really excited about it, but I'm kind of attracted to something else. Days go by, weeks go by, months go by, years go by. The PlayStation gathers dust. And what comes next? The PlayStation 2. And all
Mhm.
of a sudden it's like, man, I hate this PlayStation. It's so slow. It doesn't have the games that I want. I wish I only had a PlayStation 2. What happened to 2 years ago when you got that first PlayStation? You were so excited about it. That this is actually one of the types of suffering. Buddhists have a very, uh, you know, measured or clinical way of these different types of suffering, but saying that actually the way that we approach things is we either don't like it or we do like it. And when we do like something, that's subject to change, and we don't like it when that change happens. Even if we're the ones that are changing, the PlayStation is the same. I'm the one who's changing. And furthermore, there's no fixed descriptor for what's going to cause suffering. Physical harm, you could say, by and large, for most people don't want physical harm, sure. But in terms of like the PlayStation, maybe I don't like that PlayStation anymore. But someone who is not of means, doesn't have the kind of money, or doesn't have a friend to buy them one for Christmas. If I give that old, rusty, dusty PlayStation to them, that might bring them great joy. So actually, what's causing me suffering might to someone else have a very different reaction. And the whole reason for this characterization is to show us the nature of our mind, that it's not static, and that the things around us are not static, and yet we think they are, and that's what makes us unhappy. If I'm able to adopt we have expressions for this, right? We have in English, easy come, easy go.
Mhm.
That's not a hollow statement. It's actually, yeah, like if you're able to see that this device or this telephone or even this job came to me and then like I got laid off, easy come, easy go, right? The reason why I'm suffering when I lose the job or I start having dissatisfaction with my job, sometimes it's not because the job itself changed. Sometimes it's because I got bored with it or I changed. And sometimes the job did change. And what's frustrating for me is my perception of it is that it would never change. And
Right.
that causes me suffering. So that's the critical component for this very first um, of the noble truths that I think we can practice right here is just starting to notice, when do we like things? When do we reject things? And does that change? Have I always hated tomatoes, or like did I used to like tomatoes when I was a kid? Now I don't like them, or I never liked tomatoes, and now that I'm older, my taste has grown into that. Just starting to notice when we feel good towards something, bad towards something, or neutral, and whether or not that's shifting. Like you've said before, has the mind moved from its original position?
Right. I want to segue off something you said, some of those old adages that we hear, even within music. We're all familiar with the song Let It Be
Hmm.
from the Beatles.
Yes.
Um, Growing up as a young officer in the Army, I served with some former Vietnam vets, and there
Oh,
was one
wow.
nugget um, that actually segued well into something Guagu says, but he says it in a different way. But they would say, "Ain't nothing but a thing, man."
Mm,
It was a very meaning, and the same thing Guagu says that it's all good. And even with our YouTube channel and the Facebook channel, life is actually good. What are we talking about? We're trying to say that just cover over something, let it be. It is what it is. It ain't nothing but a thing. Life's all is all good. No, it's about a matter of looking in how we make something into a big deal. In the Dharma seals or the three marks of existence, is that we gave the PlayStation an existence and glorified it to a certain point um, through our own construction.
that's right.
We made it into a big deal, and then of course, our when the reality doesn't quite match with our fantasy, it's because we had these mental constructs. We made it into a thing. We made it into something. In other words, of the marks of existence, the last one is not self, meaning that actually everything is made up of many other things. It doesn't have this nuance of being exactly what you thought it was going to be, or even what you thought it was. And no one actually has a correct conceptualization of an item or a thing in front of them, but they make it into a big deal. They make it into a thing. And so by deconstructing a little bit, it was like, and it happens to us like, well, why am I disappointed? That PlayStation sucks.
Hmm.
No, your mental construct. You made it into a thing. It didn't match your fantasy. It never will. And and then of course we change. You look at the things that you liked when you were 10. I mean, you're thinking, well, that's a childish toy. Or when I was very young, 13, 14 years old, I used to think some of these sports cars or some of these jacked up trucks that guys like to drive now were really a big thing. But I look at them now as a well, even when I was in my 40s, it's like, well, those are ridiculous. Now, some people still like that, and maybe they finally afford it and they buy that Corvette or whatever, and they like, yeah, ain't that cool? They're running around in their New Balance shoes with their socks pulled up to their ankles, and they think they've idealized it, romanticized it to a certain point, and maybe it still feels good for them, and maybe it works, but then maybe again people are like, dude, you're a fool, or
That's
whatever.
true.
But these kind of created fantasies, and then they don't live up to our fantasies, and it's because going back to the old Vietnam veteran saying, it ain't nothing but a thing, man. In other words, if we don't give it that power of idealization, then you treat it as it is.
That's right.
You just let it be. It is what it is. That's how all those things actually have. They're not to say that we're putting a different flavor on it, but that is reality. That things are not the way we construct them. Things change. Because we change. And then, but if we keep held to a particular belief of something, our conceptualization, and then that reality doesn't match our conceptualization, then that's when we have suffering.
That's right.
Or even for the 5 minutes or the 10 minutes or the 3 days that it really made you happy, that will change. And so even saying, well, I've got to this place of happiness, but now I'm no longer happy. What changed? You did. But if you can kind of look at that and say, oh, yeah, okay. No, I was happy for a while, but it changed. That's contentment. It's okay to be thrilled by doing something, going somewhere, or going to the mountains or going to the beach. That's okay. You love it for while it is. But things change. And if we just kind of look for that continuance of changing, not only as things do, all things change. Trees grow, grass grows, snow comes, snow melts, kind of thing. The beach changes. If we look for those dynamic changes, and not have a static imagery, we actually begin to see more. We become more creative. Our knowledge grows. Our view of the world changes. And so the idea that life is suffering, well, only as long as we keep it boxed in. But if we open up this conceptualization, it's not suffering. It's kind of an indicator that if you're suffering, you need to kind of look at what's happening and who has some control on that. Because no matter what, there have been people that have been in horrible situations, and how they respond to that may be different. And so not everybody's going to respond to very tragic situations. And so don't always try to measure this by, well, yeah, but if I'm a 7-year-old kid in Gaza, I'm having a bad day. You goddamn right you're having a bad day. But there are other people that maybe treat it in a different way, or at least that this too shall pass. And then maybe there will be a brighter day the next day. But, so there's that level. But we're talking about your life. your how you interact at the office with your kids driving down the road. And if we take away from our own conceptualization, our own integration with the world, and say, well, yeah, but what about those guys? We're actually ignoring what's right in front of us, which is how we deal with the world.
That's very true. And I appreciate that you brought up the three Dharma seals of suffering, impermanence, and no self, which we spoke about in depth in a previous episode, because the if we accept that our existence is characterized by wanting stuff and not wanting other stuff, or being neutral to stuff, and that when we get things that we like, we're happy for a period. When we don't get things that we like, or when things that we like are when we encounter emotions, or I don't know, somebody pisses us off, or we get punched in the nose and we don't like that, that's actually, if we characterize that as suffering, the way out of these modes of being happy when we get good stuff, or being angry when we get punched in the face, the way out of these modes is recognizing impermanence and emptiness and not self.
Right.
And this pretty much encapsulates the second, third, and fourth noble truths, saying
Mm-hmm.
that there's a cause for our suffering, is that we view things incorrectly and we grasp at certain things. There's a cessation, which means that we are able to not suffer. And the way to not suffer is by following the Noble Eightfold Path. Well, all of these are encapsulated within the three Dharma seals.
Yes.
I'll give just a brief example that happened to me last week.
Okay.
It actually took a week to sort this out. And this is a brief parable. This is the parable of the internet. That we have home internet. Both my partner and I, we work from home. Everything we do, revolves around having good working internet. And I think Tuesday sometime last week, uh, it just stopped working and just couldn't get it to work. So what happens, instead of going to my morning meeting and doing what I need to do, I spent 2.5 hours on the phone with Xfinity trying to fix it, having them send somebody out, the technician working with it. And to make a long story short, it kind of worked over the course of the week, but it wasn't working for my partner. And by earlier this week, I had resolved the issue by taking matters into my own hands. Now, what does this have to do with suffering? Well, first of all, we categorize this thing when we say, like, oh, my internet went out. Well, what is the internet? We've already made it into like this boxed thing, that it's like this thing that is just supposed to work all the time. And it's got
Mm-hmm.
to be static and unchanging. Whereas the internet, actually, it's made up of a thousand different things, that most of us have no frame of reference for, right? It's my computer, it's the cables or the Wi-Fi, it's the router, it's the modem, it's the cables that lead from the router and modem to the cable company. It's the data packets that go back and forth. It's all the different settings. It's the technicians working on them. It's the people who invented it. I mean, like, the internet is not this one thing. And
Right.
keeping it up and running all the time it's an impossible task. It's trying to, wrangle 1,000 cats. And so my perception of it as this static thing that I don't really think about it was brought right to my face last week, and say that actually the internet is 1,000 different things, and there's 1,000 different things that could be wrong with it.
Right.
And it's not permanent, it's not static, and you're angry because it's not working when it should be. And not that I did anything, saintly or Buddha like about it, and like immediately started meditating or something to fix it. No, I had to, like, go through the crucible to be able to fix the thing. But if I spend my time, uh, and I'm not saying that I didn't, but if I spend my time just being frustrated with the thing, and um, upset that it didn't live up to my expectations about it being one thing and static all the time, if I spend my time ruminating about that, I'm just going to be unhappy. And that's one very small, insignificant type of suffering. But I think it demonstrates an example that if we flip that, if we invert that, and I'm conscious that, like, oh, yeah, the internet's out, Well, of course, because it's a bunch of bits and bobs, most of which I don't understand. And also, it was impermanent to begin with. Maybe I'm not so frustrated with it. Maybe I'm not so angry about it. Maybe I'm not cursing at the Comcast employee or, I unfortunately didn't do that, but maybe I will be a little bit more gracious when the technician comes to my house. Or in my case, they weren't even able to solve the problem. I had to go to the internet and figure out my own solution.
Mhm.
And um, it makes me a bit more, as you put it, a bit more open to what the solutions are to what's actually happening rather than what I want to be happening, or rather what I think should be happening, or getting into the blame game or what have you. I'm just present with things as they are. And that is inverting the way that we normally approach things. Because normally we think the world revolves around us and it should be static, permanent, and just like bring me happiness. The happiness actually comes from within. It's happiness with just being cool with what's existing, or as Guagu likes to say, it's all good.
Right.
Um, and Before I pass it off to you again, I just wanted
Yeah.
to mention that we probably should also underscore this with this is all great wishful thinking, unless we have a method that
Right.
can help us to see this for ourselves. So we should let's come around back to that at some point.
Okay. And actually, I'll not only you look at the internet is a really good example that people can see that things change, but also that it is, you've heard this word emptiness or not self. And just like you discovered that it's 1,000 different things. There is no one thing called the internet. But if we make it into that big deal, the internet's not working. Actually, there's two things that can happen. Is we get mad at something that doesn't exist in and of itself, and you know, as intellectuals, we give ourselves a free pass to use deductive reasoning.
Right.
And on another part of the YouTube channel, my wife and I have built a house, and we go through all the steps of house building, and we're doing another one. But most all of the stuff that we've approached is some of it's brand new, and working alone, oftentimes I could never look at the whole issue as a single thing, but a myriad of things and how they're kind of tied together. Like frustration with the internet not working makes you completely inefficient, not effective whatsoever. Maybe you feel good by blaming it on somebody else, but just like the person that works in the Xfinity office, who the hell knows? There could have been a bear that ate a tree and knocked down a line somewhere. And, we're all sitting there pointing fingers at one another, but nobody's actually using, okay, let's look at it for what it is. It's a very complicated issue. Now let's use deductive reasoning to find out what's going on. So then in this case, as is a case of a lot of these things, by, coming to that idea that it's not a single thing, but it's a multi-complex thing.
Yes.
And then look at it like, cool, I get to figure something out. And you use deductive reasoning or whatever you want to call it. Okay, we took a momentary break to charge my iPad. We're talking about, in this case, the practice of problem solving by using the Dharma seals. And life is suffering. Things change, and things are made up of many, many things. And Sam's example of the internet not being a single thing, but being many, many things. And by not becoming frustrated and looking into it deeply, problem solving, deductive reasoning, not giving it up by blaming on somebody else, not satisfying ourselves with anger and frustration, but being an efficient human being, being effective. Because it's so much easier to blame it on someone else and go and throw down a couple of beers and say, yeah, my suffering is due to somebody else. Let me blame it on somebody else. No, I mean, you can do that and you continue to suffer. Or you can look at an issue and say, what can I do? Is this something that I can do something with? If it is, then do it. If it's something you can't do something with, then what is the purpose of your frustration? But if it is something that, yes, I think I can do something. And Sam gave a really great example of paring down, going through a couple of steps, and eventually getting it somewhat fixed, even though it was sort of not working so well for Annie, but it was working well for Sam. But, they figured that part out too. And so this is really, Dharma practice in daily life. We can, it can help us be more efficient. You can call it spiritual, or you can just call it the fine tuning of being a good human being and living life and making the most of it. Blaming someone else or something else and being frustrated or angry or whatever, does that get you anything? Probably not. So yeah, I just wanted to tag off your example, a great example
Yeah,
of day.
I think we all experience this too. And your point is well taken that if we're able to view things as a number of component parts and not just this whole thing that we're angry with, we're better to problem solve because if we think, oh, the internet is out, that's just like a mountain, right? We don't even know where to take a crack at it. I mean, we're using a very simple example like the internet, but we could talk about international politics or any number
Yeah.
of different interpersonal situations. The one thing that is fascinating, and not necessarily privileging Chan over other types of Buddhism or other traditions, but one that's really fascinating is that Chan approaches, in specific, the methods that Chan uses in terms of meditation attempt to put us right at the door of experiencing the way things are for ourselves rather than approaching it piecemeal or conceptually. There's nothing wrong with taking teachings such as this and thinking about them, ruminating, discussing them, writing papers, reading books, what have you. But if you take a method like silent illumination, which we should bookmark doing a podcast about that at some point,
Yeah.
the basic practice of silent illumination, after one learns to relax their body, perhaps draw their focus to their breath and have a little bit of concentration, um, is to rest the mind in the experience of the body in the present moment or in the experience of experiencing itself. Which when we draw ourselves to what we're doing right now, whether it's we're sitting or we're walking, we're washing dishes, we're working or doing something non-conceptual, we're we can't help but be drawn into the impermanent nature of things and the lack of separation between ourselves and whatever else is happening around us. If I'm walking, the scenery is changing minute by minute, second by second, millisecond by millisecond, and I'm changing with it. When I'm sitting, my breath rises and my breath falls. My body feels, my body sensations are continually changing. The sounds around me are changing. If my eyes are open, the sights, even if it's just like a leaf blowing across my sight or an ant crawling, the screen in front of me, so to speak, isn't isn't static. Nothing is static. And silent illumination practice allows us to experience that for ourselves, moment to moment, new moment to new moment to new moment. And what can occur is that we start to identify with the way things actually are rather than our perception, which is
Yes.
static and permanent. And when we start identifying with the way things actually are, this is the key point. I know I've been talking a lot about inversion, but the key point is that it inverts the whole Buddhist project, which is the Four Noble Truths. So we suffer. Why do we suffer? How do we not suffer? Follow the Noble Eightfold Path. Actually, when we are identifying with the way things actually are, like in silent illumination,
Mhm.
what emerges effortlessly is that Noble Eightfold Path. Actually, it things like everything shifts. We can't help but have the right view of the way things are. We can't help but live in accordance with ethical values. We can't help but live in accordance with compassion for other beings because we're There's no, what did you call it in the previous episode? There's no filter, or there's no division between ourselves and the outside world. It's just we're present with the way things are, and um, undergirding all of that is just, true happiness, true joy.
I wanted to do a kind of a segue from even the word silent illumination, even with what you said and what I said previously. In that, for those of you that are familiar with it, when we're talking about silence in this case of the silent illumination, meaning there's no rumination. As Sam was saying, if you're already in accord with the Four Noble Truths, and within that, impermanence and not self or emptiness, and realizing that otherwise you may create conflict, division. The silence is there's not a lot of chatter in your mind. You're very clear. You're illuminated as to what the next step might be within, problem solving. True problem solving in this case of the internet or house building or mowing your grass or washing the dishes. The silence is not a lot of overlay, not a lot of filters, hardly any, just being very clear and on task. So it's not as mystical as it might sound that, I have to go up into the mountains to silently illuminate. No, just get the garbage out of your head. Do what needs to be done without all this discourse of, well, I want it to be this way. Why can't it be that way? Where's that damn Xfinity guy? That's not silent. That's not illuminating. That's suffering. And to do what needs to be done, accepting things as they are. I have some control on this. I kind of know the steps. Let me just go through. And for each one that kind of fails, you go like, cool. What is the next step? That's silent illumination in action without having to go and put on robes and burn incense and hide in a cave somewhere. No, you can do that right at your house. And that is the Dharma in action. That is silent illumination. And it's beautiful. And if you approach it that way, it's quite fascinating, actually. Give me a challenge. Let my internet break, let me,
Let me practice. Let me get into it.
yeah, it's like, let me figure out why my plumbing's not working. I think I did everything. Now let me go back, I actually had a plumbing problem when I was first building this house, and I'd had a what's called a sanitary Y flipped, inverted, and of course it's not going to work. And I looked at it like,
Whoops.
oh, I've got to cut some pipe and turn that around. But I'm glad I caught that now. Otherwise, I would have had some problems with plumbing. But I was clear what I was doing, but I just got busy and flipped a pipe that was supposed to be flowing this way, and it was flowing that way, but it's supposed to flow the other way to go to the septic tank. I mean, so that's it. That's the practice. But of course, in meditation, what we're trying to get to, bringing it back to on the cushion, is realizing when we're distracted and then coming back to this place of clarity. If you're sitting, it's with a breath, or it's, direct contemplation, which we'll talk about all these other things. It's being with the mind focused and the body relaxed on what you're doing without filters, without distracted thinking.
Right. We should definitely bookmark an episode soon to talk about that. And I know we've been going pretty long in a previous episode, so perhaps we can leave it there for today and just ask
Yeah.
you if we wanted to practice these Four Noble Truths in our daily lives, just a very simple daily practice. Like how would you encourage someone to incorporate that?
Going back to that one beautiful statement, did the mind move? In other words, did I create some conflict in my mind? How did I do that? At what point did it fall apart? And if you go back to that simple statement, ain't nothing but a thing. Um, when did you make something into a big deal? And doing that, how did that directly impact how you're feeling right now? It's very straightforward. Very straightforward. Um, you get distracted. on what you were doing and you lost track with what you were thinking and what you were saying, um, and you feel some angst or anger or whatever, um, what caused you to be distracted? It was a layer in the mind, wanting like a conversation to get over with or whatever. And so you made a big deal out of what was happening in that moment, wanting it to be other than what it was. And then you lost track of what you were saying, a conversation perhaps, or maybe you had to have somebody, would you say that again? Why? Why did that happen? Why did you lose track with what that person was saying to you? Because you were in your head thinking about something else, wanting it to be a different way, wanting to express yourself in a different way. You were not listening, active listening. That's there. So, um, summing that up, if you feel irritation about something, why is that? Not justifying your irritation, but what caused your mind to move?
That's
Maybe
such
that.
a great practice. Oh my goodness. Especially for those of us who are starting out on meditation, because uh, I don't have a percentage, but I think most people, we are just led around by the nose by our emotions and feelings and stimuli, 100% of the time. We see a family member that we don't like and immediately we're on edge. We smell a scent that we like and we're happy. We receive an email that we don't care about, we delete it. But there's no self-reflection there, right? To see like, oh, there was a trigger and then this happened, or I got angry and this is why, or this really pleases me when this happens, and that goes back to, I don't know, my childhood or something. It's what people go to psychotherapists for, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't. Absolutely, there's a room for that, but we can do some of that work ourselves, or at least
Right.
prime our minds for success.
Prime your mind. And then, there's always the go back too. So you don't put it outside yourself, even though
Hmm.
you could justify it. Your response is within your control. Again, using that great word, the breakdown people have done before, responsibility. The way you respond to the world, to whatever happens to you, you have the ability, you have the responsibility.
That's right.
Because, and that's true when, 1,000 people might have 999 different responses to exactly the same stimuli. And so that you're suffering to a situation, you have the ability to respond to it, in how you choose.
Beautiful.
Mm.
Thank you for that. That's gonna do it for our episode of Off the Cushion podcast today. Please do like and subscribe for more. And thank you so much for tuning in. And you can leave a question or comment for us on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you found us. And otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you. See you.